Well, I did a video session actually explaining the use of symbols in Affinity and the ability to create symmetrical objects. One of the things that I used to have a challenge with before in the likes of Photoshop and Illustrator was to be able to create an offset where there's equal distribution from each of the sides. Um, I've now since then been able to find in Illustrator, found the offset tools, etc., and started using them. Moving to Affinity now, which I simply love and sort of adopted as my go-to tools, there's currently no offset tool. And for those of you who don't understand what I'm referring to when I speak about offset tool and what an offset is and how different it is to creating a shape and then, you know, creating a proportional representation of it and sizing it. Let me just maybe explain. I'm going to create another artboard here, and how to do it. There's various ways of doing it, but I'm going to do it just a simple way of clicking artboard. And when I say insert artboard, it will use a copy of this artboard to create a sized one next to it. I click insert, pretty much have it there. I am then going to, in the layers palette, I'm going to just call this the session that we are doing. Okay, so that is where I'm going to work. And then I've locked this tutorial artboard here. I'm not going to be replicating this. That means every dimension the same. I'm just using it as a reference so that we end up with a structure similar to this. Usually what happens is if you have an object, I'm going to just switch off the edges here. If you have an object like this, and this thing has still got all preset colors in it, okay, and you wanted to create another object inside that's the same shape, but equal in distance from each of the sides. Usually what we think it's possible is I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to select the area that says rectangle and I press Ctrl J. So I've got a second one here, and then I'm going to just change the color so we know we're working with two different ones. Okay, press Ctrl J to get it back there. Usually what we do is we'll grab over in the corner, press Ctrl, Shift, and Alt, and we'd proportionately size around the center of this object. But interesting, what happens? The size from this side is much wider than the top area, although I proportionately size it, and that's just a mathematical fact that because of the angles and the way it's been shaped, it won't be equal from each side. And the tool to actually get it equal from each side is usually referred to as an offset tool, which I regularly use almost all the time in 3D software when I'm editing. So Affinity might not have the tool now, but there is a workaround. So any shape that's not going to be equal on either shape. So if you had, for example, a perfect square, which this is not if I look here at my transform, but if that was a perfect square, if I did exactly this and created a copy and resized it towards the inside, each of the sides would be equal from the outside. Okay, and someone might say, oh, but I can actually guess where it goes to and measure. Yes, that's fine with a rectangle, but when you come to a shape like this, when you've got to move a curved surface away from another curved surface and have it equal from every particular point, then it's basically becomes a bit impossible to do that freehand. So offset tool is the key. How do we work around it without an offset tool inside Affinity Designer? Yeah, let's get going. Let me delete that out. If I want to create a object now around a particular center axis, then I can drop in a guideline here. Different ways of doing it. I could drag one from the ruler across onto this area. I choose to go to View and choose Guideline Manager. And here basically it says Vertical Guides. If I click in there, it drops a guide in the center of this particular artboard. Now just roughly looking at this, we might think this is 600, but technically it is actually 601. Okay, but for us, it's not a matter. I mean, we could shift it this way, that way, that way. We're just using it as a center reference point. As I mentioned, I am not working exact proportions, so I'm going to just use that as a guide. Let me go to my pen tool. I click on here. Before I click here, you can see this thing highlights as I select and so forth. If you don't have snapping enabled, use the preset. I'm not going to explain anything there. Use the preset page layout with objects, and it'll pretty much give you the nice snappings that you need from the word get-go. So I'm going to zoom in there. If I click here now, the tendency would be to click, move, click, and then create a curve, and then create another curve. But my workflow is I work to strict points. So I'll go click here, then I press the shift button to constrain. You see the little yellow line. I'm going to click there, then I let go of the shift, and I'm going to assume about that area, okay, to represent the next point there. And then I press shift to constrain down to about this area, and then let go of shift and go to the middle. So basically from this middle there, that point, and at the bottom. Okay, now you might be concerned about what's going on here in that we've got a very funny shape. It doesn't look anything like that. But don't worry, that's the power of Affinity. And you could choose a different workflow. This is just how I do it. Just one other thing that is important. If you, for example, go and you create a shape and go onto a point and move the next point, and you look, you see this one's round and that's got squares on it. The squares mean it's a angle, a sharp angle. That means it's a rounded angle, even if you can't see that close. The reason why that happened is because as I clicked, I actually moved the mouse, so it assumed that I wanted some sort of curvature there. When we're starting off with a design of this nature, make sure each of these ones are a little square. How do you do that? You go to your node tool and you can just run over that there, and here to convert, you click on convert to sharp. At the moment, it's probably one of these rounded ones. So you're going to click convert to sharp and see what happens. From the circle, it goes to a nice square. So if we select there now, oops, I don't know where I put that. Let me go and select it. Okay. See, this is where you should actually put a stroke size on it. That will help. But anyhow, if I go and select it, you'll see there it's changed to the square now, okay, which is what we want. So I'm going to just press delete there. Now I've got one here and I don't know exactly where this is. I'm going to just get my node tool and just see if I can select it. Okay, that's not a good example for me to show you. I should be, yeah, let me just select on here, on the layer, and it will select there. I'm going to just add maybe one point's worth of thickness over there so we can actually see the object. When I work here, I actually don't want the outline when I'm going to create a mirror of this object. But for now, I need to use it as a reference so I can actually find the thing else. You're going to find me having to scroll on the page trying to look for it. Okay, like I said, if you can't see it, just click on the layer. It will make that selection. Then I make the full color, whatever I'm going to use. Let me use a green here. And I don't have to close this area to make it full close over there, okay? You just go from the point. Now, how do I get it close to that shape? Here again, Affinity is brilliant with it. I go to the node tool, and I'm going to maybe just select that first and go to the node tool. You can see they're all nice squares over there. With the node tool, if I click onto any area, any line, it will form another node. Let me show you. If I click there, I have another node, but I don't want that now. Control C. If I hover close to it, you'll see there's a little tilde that comes there. And that means I can actually pull on that line. So I'm going to left mouse button click and pull. Okay, so you see I can pull any which way. So in this case, I want to create a little curve. And like I said, I'm not replicating that, else I'd use that as a template to work over. So I'm just getting the idea there. Here, how do we get this to have a nice curve now? Again, the node tool, I select that node, and I have a choice here of going to convert to smooth or convert to smart. They're basically the same. The smart one will convert it to a smooth edge, but it's got more intelligence in it. So we choose that one as a good option. Click that and see what beautiful things happen here. Comes nice and smooth. However, this line is towards the inside. If you take a vertical from here, it's going to the inside, not to the outside. So for me to move that point across, I press shift. If I want to constrain it, I can do that. Or I can just take the point and move it to where I feel is going to be a good representation. Okay, and that's pretty much, I've got the half of the shape. How do I get to the other side? I have that selected. I will go now to flip horizontal. Okay, it's going to take that and flip it horizontal. But I don't want to flip the original one. I just want a copy of this. So I go Control C, Control V. It makes a copy of that. And if you look in the layers palette, you see there's an additional one. I'm going to go Control Z. We have a single, go Control C, Control V. They have a copy on top of it. Now the top one I've selected, I am going to mirror that and you will see them flipping on either side. Okay, and then because you have your snap tool on, you can go and it will snap to each other. And that's what you want. Okay, I've got this guideline which I don't need at this point anymore. I'm going to just drag it off the actual artboard and it will disappear. I don't have to drag it against any sides. It's just off the artboard. So I've got these selected. I'm going to keep down Shift and select the other one. And you'll see a faint line over here which is representative of that's where the actual area ends. How do I get this to become one object? If we look in the layers palette, there are two objects. I go up to the menu bar here, and if you don't see these icons up here, you can go into an open space, right click and go say Customize Toolbar, and you'll see all the icons which you can drag or drag off the bar or drag into the bar as such there. Okay, but I'm happy with having that there. I've selected both of them and I'm going to go to the Add tool. And you'll watch now from these two in the layers, click Add, it becomes a single tool. Okay, if I click off it and click on it again, it's going to be a single tool. Okay, but now I'm going to show you something here. Have you noticed this? There is a bit of a discrepancy here. I thought I had aligned it correctly and I thought it was perfectly aligned. And if you use your eye in the snapping tool, sometimes based on the snapping settings, you might not have it correctly. So a good way to rather do this process, because you're wanting it to be pixel correct, is I'm going to say Control Z, undo that. Okay. When I have these two layers, what I do is I'll move the one across. I don't have to worry about aligning it as such. I'm going to use the actual tools because I want to work with a bit more precision. These tools I have pulled out and put them separately. They're all actually in this Arrange tool. They're all found here, but I've taken some of them out so I can actually work with them independently and quickly click on them. What I want to achieve is to get these perfectly aligned because I know they're copies of each other. I want to align them perfectly. How do I do that? I select one, press Shift, select the other one. Then I use the Align to Top or Align to Bottom. Now, depending on which one I use, it will have different actions. If I say Align to Top, what it's understanding is that everything that's selected will be moved to the object that's the highest or to the top. The highest in the top, if you could call it. In this case, the one on the right will be lifted to one on the left. If I have to choose this, it will look at the object the lowest down, which in this case is the one on the right, and it will move the one on the left down to that. So if there were three objects, it would move all the objects to the lowest one, in this case, or to the highest. So we should see the one on the right actually shift up. And here, this is where we'll overcome that problem where we had a bit of offset between these two because we used just our eye and a snapping tool. We don't know what the snapping settings were, etc. So if I go here now, I know at this stage that these up to the pixel are right close to each other. Now, as you notice here also, we got this orange line which is inherited from the fact that we were using it when we started the design. I just would routinely go and remove that for now. We just want to work with a clean object just with the fill, no strokes on the outside. Okay, so technically don't go and select the stroke and make it transparent. We want to have it as 0 when we're doing this editing, so we're working pixel for pixel. Okay, so now I've got this area and this area. How do I get them together? I could also drag it, but then I'm sitting with the same problem. What I do is I go to the Range tool, and then there's this tool, Space Horizontally. I want 0 pixels between these two objects. Okay, so if I click this, you're going to see this Align Auto Distribute. It's leaving the object space like that because it's assuming the space I've given it is what is expected. It's not anticipating that I need to have any other space given unless I specify. So if I want to specify, I must switch auto distribute and then put in the pixel value if I wanted them separated by a certain number of pixels. However, in this case, if I switch auto distribute off, it starts off defaulting to 0 pixels, which is exactly where I actually want it to be. I want these to be close to each other with 0 pixels in between. They must be distributed from each other, 0 pixels in between. So when I click this off, you'll see it automatically will jump and there'll be 0 pixels in between. Okay, you must click on OK because you are doing multiple edits, and over here the program wants to know when you're totally done. If you click off here, it assumes that you want to disable, or you didn't want to select the stuff you did. So it's maybe just getting used to that. If I click off here now onto the green object, these things will just shuffle back again. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm happy with it. Now again, I'm going to take that center, move it out of the way. And now we have a different situation. If I select both of these, select one, shift, select the other one. Again, in the layers palette, it's the two. I'm going to say add. We have one there, but now if I go close, you can see pretty much we've got a perfect edge there. Okay, so it might feel like it's initially a bit of a longer way than just dragging it, but then you are going to be 100% sure your object is there. Because once you have the first object, everything is worked off that object. And remember, the whole purpose of this little session is to show you about how we're working with the offset, the quasi-offset tool. It's not a real offset tool, but we'll be using the actual stroke, because when we add a stroke to this object, it gives an equal distribution on either side of this edge of it or both sides at the same time. Okay, so it can do a stroke to the outside, a stroke to the inside, or both at the same time. Okay, so I'm going to just press Control J to create another copy and then switch off this original one, so I just have it there. It's just my habit of doing that. So I'm on the curve here now, and let me just show you what happens when I select a stroke. In this case, the stroke is orange here. I'm going to just click and make the stroke black so we can see it a bit better. Okay, so by default, when I add a color in there, it just jumps to 1 point. Okay, in this case here now, these are the 3 tools that we are going to be considering. This means align the stroke to center, which means that if I select this area, and just one other point, this mitre here usually comes on as 1.4, and I change it to 4 for a reason I'll show you just now. If you leave it on 1.4, it has a little artifact that it creates when you start to make the stroke a bit bigger. But now we're working with align the stroke to center. This means that the perfect edge of this object will be the center, and as I increase it, it will push to the outside and inside with the stroke. If I show you there, okay, and if I hover over it, can you see that's the center and it's going outside and inside equally. But just interesting, if you look at the edge here, can you see this almost cut off area here? That is because of the mitre setting. So if you wanted perfectly representing the edges there, I use the amount 4 there, and you'll see what will happen. Oops, did I select that? We go to 4, and there you can see it gets perfectly sharp there. Okay, so I routinely just leave that on 4. Okay, so this is just to show towards the outside or inside. Now, if we are busy replicating a shape like this, I'm assuming that the outside of this blue is the edge of the object, and the green here that we're using as the reference is going to be the stroke that I'm going to put towards the outside of the object. So instead of choosing this one that says align the actual stroke to the center, I'm going to choose it that I align the stroke to the outside. So at the edge of the actual object, it's going to start the stroke. Just look what happens. If I click there now, the object ends here and the stroke continues towards the outside. Okay, I'm going to just drop the thickness down maybe to 10. Okay, so that's what I'm pretty happy with. Now I've got an outside stroke. However, if I look at this here, the outside stroke and the object are all one. So how do I actually separate these? And I recommend by all standards that you separate these, because at the end of the day, when you're doing the edit, you have these as independent objects and you're able to add effects to them independently. If they're all stuck together and just one pasted over the other, if you want to add an effect, it's going to be hidden underneath each other. Okay, I think I'm going to just go on the stroke, maybe make it a bit thicker, maybe 15. Let's see what we come with. Okay, so how do I separate the actual stroke from the object? I want to pull this border area, which is black, away from the green. And there is a beautiful tool called the Expand Stroke tool. I've turned it into a quick key E, and that you can access if you go under Preferences. You can go to Keyboard Shortcuts, and the layers where the menu actually resides. And if you scroll down, you'll see the tool there that says Expand Stroke. You just type in the key you want. If it's available, it will give it to you. If it's not, you'll either override the existing one or you can change it. So I've changed it to E, and when I press the E key, look what happens here on this layer that says curve. Okay, let me maybe call this working, so that we know that's the one I'm working on. If I click E now, can you see what happens? It splits, and if I switch this off, it actually splits that stroke on the outside of the object from the actual object. It's made it into two objects now, which is where we're using the leverage of this offset, because we know that the stroke moves exactly like we want to, like an offset tool. So we create the offset with the stroke, and then we separate it using that tool that I've just mentioned now, the Expand Stroke tool. Okay, so we're happy that we've got an outline one. Now I've got to create this blue area. So how do I go about? I'm going to just hide this. How do I go about creating it? That will be simple. If you followed what I said early on, we are going to click there, and I'm going to choose now Align the Stroke to Inside. Okay, so I go Align Stroke to Inside, pull that out, and that's about the thickness I'm looking at. Okay, and you see the beautiful offset that it creates there. So we've got that. Now, how do I separate the actual stroke from the actual object? Yes, once again, we go to Expand Stroke. I will use my E key, but we'll notice something slightly different between this one, because I'm expanding to the inside. When I separated, this green area still extends right to the edge, because that's the edge of the green area. With the first one we did, is the stroke actually existed on the outside of the object. So we'll have to be aware of that and see. It would be nice if we had to create the offset and then it just became the separate green as the shape here and the outline. But it's not expected to do that because of us using the stroke towards the inside. I'm on this layer and I'm going to press E again, and you see what happens. E, there we have a stroke. So if I switch off the green, we're sitting with a stroke. Switch on the green. If I switch off this curve now, we'll see the green would go right to that edge. Just check that out. Okay, which is expected because we've actually expanded it towards the inside of the actual shape. Now, here's the other key. How are we able to then not have that green extend to the end and let it just end on this area? Okay, for those of you guys who are maybe familiar with the tools, it's going back again to the same tools up here we were using, but a different one there. What we will do is use this outside shape that we have here to subtract it from the underlying shape, this whole shape. So if we subtract that, we'll be sitting only with a section on the inside. Okay, but if I use the outside to subtract it from the inside, then I won't have an outside anymore because the program will kind of merge the two. So I'm going to make a copy of the outside one because I still need it once we've done our editing. So what I'm going to do is go there, and on that thick layer, this one here, I'm going to press Control J, and I'm going to just hide that. So I have another copy of this black outline here. I'm using the one copy that I've just created, and I'm going to select it and shift and select the actual green area. Now I go to these tools and I'm going to say subtract this outside border, which is the one on top, from the entire object underneath it. often with Affinity, it takes the top one and affects the bottom one, even if you're working with masks and everything. So I'm going to take the top one and subtract it from the bottom one. Okay, so here you can actually see these icons actually show it. This little circle is on top, and it's going to subtract it from the one at the bottom of it. So if I click here now, I anticipate that I'll be sitting only with a green area. So let's click that. Boom, there we are. Only the green area. When I click the layer that I've switched off on top, sitting with that. And maybe I'm going to just change this color to one that we can distinguish. Make sure that's the foreground color. Okay, so when I switch on the border, we can see that. And that's pretty much it. Now we have that separated, that separated, and the middle separated there. And that's technically what we wanted out of this whole session that we wanted to achieve. We've now been able to create the shield with offsets, equal sizes, etc. And again, what is the benefit of that? If I go onto the green layer and I add an effect, if I go to effects and maybe I drop let's see, an inner shadow, pull some random features here. Okay. Let's leave that angle. Basically now I can add an effect to this green alone because the edge is right here and you can see the effect. Had I made the edge, like I said, right to the end of this entire object and not cut them out, this drop shadow, you wouldn't see the effect over here. Okay, in the same way I can go and select this area and I could actually go and say, let's put a gradient in it. Okay, pull it up on that. Maybe pull a green in there. Whatever. Okay, you can see now I'm working independently on the different. I'm just delete that. Okay. Change the color there. Okay, so I'm working independently on each one of this, and that's what you want to be able to achieve. So hopefully this has been of value to you, that you're able to create a object with an equal offset there. And if you look at this, the distance from there to there is the same as from every corresponding pixel around this curve. Okay, because we've created it with having it as an offset in mind and not just a proportional shape in there. So when Affinity brings out their offset tool, you know, one that's just in the menu, we'll probably be able to do this a bit faster. But I think the technique that I'm showing you here at least sets you at a good space that even if we do have an offset tool, you might find that this technique comes in handy at other times. Okay, so yeah, hopefully this has been of value. Have a fantastic day and share the knowledge with people as you meet them along to spread the good news, the gospel of the Affinity product range, and then we'll get the user base to grow quite big from that. So have a great day again, and God bless you.